The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Creek, a small frontier town nestled between rolling hills and endless prairie. The wooden buildings stood like weathered sentinels against the azure sky, their paint peeling from countless seasons of wind and rain. In the center of the modest town square, a pillory stood as a grim reminder of frontier justice, and today it held a prisoner. Clara Whitmore's golden hair caught the early light as she stood locked in the wooden restraints, her head and hands trapped between the heavy planks. Her blue calico dress, once her finest garment, was now dusty and torn at the hem. The sign hanging around her neck bore the crude lettering, "Thief, 3 days." She had been there since dawn, and already the curious stares and whispered comments of the townspeople made her cheeks burn with shame. "Well, would you look at what we caught?" sneered Martha Henley, the blacksmith's wife, as she passed with her marketing basket. "Fancy mail-order bride too good to work for her supper." Clara bit her lip, refusing to give the woman the satisfaction of a response. The truth was far more complicated than these people could understand. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Ohio, answering an advertisement placed by Samuel Garrett, a prosperous rancher who promised marriage to a refined lady of good character. But when she arrived on the dusty stagecoach 3 weeks ago, Samuel had taken one look at her and declared she wouldn't do. "Too slight," he had pronounced, circling her like she was livestock at auction. "I need a woman who can work, not some delicate flower who'll wilt at the first sign of hardship." Left stranded with barely $2 to her name and no means to return east, Clara had tried to find work. But in a town where women were scarce and suspicious of outsiders, opportunities were few. The general store owner's wife accused her of putting on airs. The saloon keeper made suggestions that turned her stomach. The few respectable families had no need for help. Yesterday, driven by 3 days without a proper meal, Clara had slipped behind Henderson's general store and taken a loaf of bread and some jerked meat. She told herself it was borrowing. She would pay it back when she found work. But Mrs. Henderson had caught her, and the sheriff had been called, and now here she stood, a public spectacle. The sun climbed higher, and Clara's throat grew parched. Her shoulders ached from the uncomfortable position, and her legs trembled with fatigue. A few children threw pebbles when their mothers weren't looking, while the adults muttered among themselves about the disgrace of it all. "Shame," said old Doc Morrison, shaking his gray head as he passed. "Pretty little thing like that. What's the world coming to when a woman has to steal bread?" "She made her choice," replied Mayor Caldwell sternly. "Law's the law, regardless of pretty faces." As the morning wore on, Clara noticed a lone figure watching from the shade of the livery stable. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were practical, worn leather chaps, a blue work shirt, and boots that had seen hard use. A black hat sat low over his eyes, but she could feel his gaze on her. Unlike the others who gawked and gossiped, this man simply watched in silence. There was something in his posture, the way he leaned against the stable wall with his arms crossed, that spoke of careful consideration rather than idle curiosity. Jack Sullivan had been in town since dawn, having ridden in to collect supplies and check on a horse he'd left with the farrier. He hadn't planned to linger, but the sight of the young woman in the pillory had stopped him cold. He'd seen plenty of rough justice on the frontier, but something about this situation didn't sit right with him. He'd made some inquiries and pieced together the story. A mail-order bride rejected and abandoned, reduced to stealing food to survive. It rankled him more than he cared to admit. Jack had little use for men like Samuel Garrett, who could discard a woman like an unwanted purchase. "Planning to stand there all day, Sullivan?" asked Pete Morrison, the livery owner, as he joined Jack in the shade. "Maybe," Jack replied without taking his eyes off the square. "That's Garrett's rejected bride," Pete offered, following Jack's gaze. "Pretty little thing, but I hear she's got no spine for frontier life." "That's so. Course, standing there in the sun all day takes some spine," Pete mused. "Haven't heard her complain once, and it's got to be near 90 degrees already." Jack pushed away from the wall. "What's the fine for theft around here?" "Depends." "Why?" "Just curious." Pete scratched his graying beard. "Well, for something small like what she took, probably $4 or $5. "Why? You thinking of paying it?" Jack didn't answer, but he was already walking toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Bradley looked up from his paperwork as Jack entered the small office. Bradley was a fair man, elected more for his steady temperament than his gun skills, though he could handle himself when necessary. "Afternoon, Jack. What brings you to town?" "That woman in the pillory," Jack said without preamble. "What's her fine?" Bradley leaned back in his chair, studying the younger man. $4. "Why? You fixing to pay it?" "Maybe." "What's her story?" The sheriff sighed and set down his pen. "Name's Clara Whitmore. Came out here to marry Samuel Garrett, but he decided she wasn't suitable. Been trying to make do on her own ever since, but work's scarce for a woman alone. Yesterday she got caught taking some food from Henderson's store." "Did she resist arrest?" "No, came along quiet as a lamb. Even apologized." Bradley shook his head. Seemed more ashamed than anything. Henderson wanted to make an example of her. Jack reached into his vest pocket and pulled out $4 silver, placing them on the sheriff's desk. "That cover it?" "Jack, you sure about this? You don't even know this woman." "I know enough." Bradley scooped up the coins and dropped them into a small wooden box. "Your money, your business. I'll go release her." A murmur ran through the small crowd that had gathered as Sheriff Bradley approached the pillory with his keys. Clara's heart raced. Surely her 3 days weren't up already? "Well, miss," Bradley said as he unlocked the restraints, "seems someone's paid your fine." Clara's hands flew to her throat as the wooden yoke was lifted away. She rubbed her sore wrists and looked around in confusion. "Paid my fine? Who?" The sheriff nodded toward the tall man approaching from across the square. "Jack Sullivan there. Says he'll stand good for you." Clara watched as the cowboy drew near. Up close, she could see his eyes were a deep brown, and despite his rough appearance, there was kindness in them. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard work and outdoor living. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I'm Jack Sullivan." "Clara Whitmore," she replied, her voice hoarse from the morning's ordeal. I don't understand. Why would you pay my fine?" Jack glanced around at the crowd that was still watching with keen interest. "Might be we should discuss that somewhere more private. You look like you could use some food and water." Clara's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, and she felt her cheeks redden. I don't have any money to repay you." "Didn't ask for repayment," Jack said simply. "Come on. Let's get you out of this sun." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Clara took it. Together they walked toward the small cafe at the end of the street, leaving behind a buzz of speculation and gossip. The Copper Creek Cafe was a modest establishment run by Maria Santos, a middle-aged Mexican woman who had come north with her late husband during the railroad boom. She looked up with interest as Jack and Clara entered. "Señor Jack," Maria greeted warmly. "You bring a friend today?" "Yes, ma'am. Could we get some food and coffee? And maybe a private table?" Maria's dark eyes took in Clara's disheveled appearance and understood immediately. "See, of course. The back table, it is yours." They settled into chairs at a small table near the window, away from the other patrons. Maria brought coffee without being asked, and Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup gratefully. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the fine, I mean. I don't understand why you'd help a stranger, but thank you." Jack studied her face over his coffee cup. Even dusty and tired, she was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was a dignity to her, a quiet strength that impressed him. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone in a place where nobody wants you," he said finally. "Are you from around here?" "Not originally. Came out from Missouri about 5 years ago, after the war. Bought some land north of here, been building a ranch." Clara nodded, then looked down at her hands. "I suppose the whole town knows my story by now. The mail-order bride who wasn't wanted." "Samuel Garrett's a fool," Jack said bluntly. She looked up in surprise. "You know him?" "Know of him. He's got a reputation for being particular about things. Too particular, if you ask me. Maria appeared with plates of beans, cornbread, and beef stew. Clara's eyes widened at the generous portions. "I really can't pay you back," she said as Maria bustled away. "I told you, I'm not asking for repayment." Jack watched as she took a tentative bite, then began eating more eagerly. "But I might have a proposition for you." Clara paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. She'd heard that word before, and it usually meant trouble for a woman in her position. "What kind of proposition?" Jack seemed to read her thoughts. "Not that kind," he said firmly. "I need help at my ranch. It's honest work, cooking, cleaning, maybe helping with the books. I can offer room and board, and a small wage." "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to get back on your feet." Clara set down her spoon and studied his face. "Why? You don't know anything about me. I could be a terrible cook, or lazy, or—" She gestured helplessly. "Could be," Jack agreed. "But I'm willing to take that chance if you are." "I don't understand. What do you get out of this arrangement?" Jack was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I've been working that ranch alone for 3 years. It's hard, lonely work. Maybe it's time I had some help. And if I can't do the work, if I'm not suitable for frontier life, like Mr. Garrett said, then we'll figure something else out. But I'm betting Garrett was wrong about you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness, had believed in her capabilities. I accept," she said quietly. "But I want to work for my keep. I won't be anyone's charity case." Jack smiled for the first time since she'd met him, and it transformed his weathered face. "Wouldn't have it any other way." They finished their meal in companionable conversation. Jack told her about his ranch, 500 acres of grassland with a small herd of cattle and a few horses. He'd built the cabin himself, along with a barn and corral. It wasn't much, he admitted, but it was growing. Clara found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Jack Sullivan was nothing like Samuel Garrett. Where Garrett had been pompous and demanding, Jack was quiet and thoughtful. Where Garrett had looked at her like a commodity to be evaluated, Jack spoke to her like a person worthy of respect. "I should warn you," she said as they prepared to leave, "I've never lived on a ranch before. I grew up in town, and my father was a shopkeeper. I know how to keep house and cook simple meals, but I don't know anything about cattle or horses." "That's all right," Jack replied. "I'm not looking for a ranch hand. I'm looking for someone to help make the place more like a home." As they walked to the general store to gather Clara's few belongings, she found herself stealing glances at her rescuer. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, nodding to the people they passed without seeming to care about their curious stares. At Henderson's store, Mr. Henderson looked up nervously as they entered. "Now see here, Sullivan, if you're thinking to cause trouble about this morning." "No trouble," Jack said calmly. "Just collecting Miss Whitmore's things." Clara retrieved her small valise from behind the counter, feeling the weight of the storekeeper's disapproving gaze. Jack stepped closer, his presence protective without being overwhelming. "Will there be anything else?" Henderson asked stiffly. "Actually, yes." Jack moved to the counter and began selecting items: coffee, sugar, flour, canned goods. "Miss Whitmore will be working at my ranch. I expect she'll be doing business here from time to time." The implication was clear. Clara was under Jack's protection now, and Henderson would treat her with respect. The storekeeper nodded reluctantly as he tallied the purchases. Outside, Jack loaded the supplies into a worn but sturdy wagon hitched to 2 bay horses. Clara climbed up onto the wooden seat, her valise at her feet, and looked back at the town where she'd spent the most humiliating morning of her life. "Having second thoughts?" Jack asked as he took up the reins. "No," Clara said, surprised by her own certainty. "I think I'm ready to see what lies ahead." The ride to Jack's ranch took them through rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. The landscape was bigger and more open than anything Clara had known back east, with a sky that seemed to stretch on forever. Mountains rose in the distant west, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning it. "Gets lonely sometimes," Jack admitted. "But there's something about all this space that gets into your blood. Makes you feel free." Clara understood what he meant. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe freely. The weight of judgment and expectation that had pressed down on her in town seemed to lift with each mile they traveled. Jack's ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. The log cabin was larger than she'd expected, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that faced the sunset. The barn was solidly built, and she could see cattle grazing in a fenced pasture beyond. "It's lovely," Clara said as Jack helped her down from the wagon. "It's home," he replied simply. The cabin's interior was spare but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and Clara could see a bedroom beyond a partially open door. "There's a second bedroom through there," Jack said, noticing her glance. "It's small, but it's yours." Clara set down her valise and looked around. The cabin was clean but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The dishes were mismatched, the furniture purely functional. Yet there was something welcoming about it, perhaps because it was so obviously built with care. "I should start supper," she said, suddenly feeling awkward. What do you usually eat?" Jack hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Whatever's handy. I'm not much of a cook." Clara moved to the kitchen area and began taking inventory. There were basic supplies: flour, beans, some salt pork, and vegetables from what must be a garden behind the cabin. It wasn't much, but she could work with it. As she prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Jack tended to the horses and brought in her few belongings. They worked in comfortable silence, each absorbed in their tasks. Over supper, they talked more about the practical aspects of the arrangement. Jack would pay her $2 a month in addition to room and board. Her duties would include cooking, cleaning, and helping with correspondence and record-keeping for the ranch. In return, she would have a safe place to live and the chance to save money for whatever future she chose. "There's just one thing," Jack said as they finished eating. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I want to be clear about that." Clara nodded, though she felt a slight pang of disappointment. "Of course. I wouldn't want you to think." "I just want us both to know where we stand," Jack said gently. "You're safe here, Clara. You have my word on that." That night, as Clara lay in her narrow bed in the small room Jack had prepared for her, she listened to the sounds of the frontier night: wind in the eaves, the distant call of a coyote, the settling of the wooden house. For the first time in weeks, she felt secure. The days that followed established a comfortable routine. Clara rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the cabin. Jack worked with his cattle and horses, returning at midday for a simple lunch before heading out again. Evenings were spent over supper and quiet conversation, sometimes joined by the scratching of Jack's pen as he worked on ranch accounts. Clara discovered that she had a talent for organization that served them both well. She reorganized Jack's haphazard record-keeping system, making it easier to track expenses and plan purchases. She also began a small garden expansion, planting herbs and vegetables that would improve their meals and reduce trips to town. "You've got a good head for this," Jack observed one evening as they went over the books together. "These records are clearer than anything I ever managed on my own." "My father always said I had a mind for details," Clara replied, pleased by the compliment. "I used to help him with his shop accounts." As the weeks passed, Clara began to feel more at home on the ranch. The work was different from what she'd known in Ohio, but it was satisfying in its own way. She took pride in the way the cabin looked under her care, in the improved meals she was able to prepare, in the small efficiencies she introduced to their daily routine. Jack, for his part, seemed more relaxed than when she'd first met him. He smiled more readily and began sharing stories of his life before the ranch, his service in the war, his decision to come west, his dreams for expanding the operation. "I'd like to build up the herd," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Maybe get into horse breeding too. There's good money in selling horses to the army." It sounds like you've got it all planned out, Clara said, rocking gently in the chair Jack had made for her. Most of it. Some things you can't plan for. He glanced at her meaningfully. Sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them. Clara felt her cheeks warm and looked away. Over the past month, she'd become increasingly aware of Jack as more than just her employer. The way he moved with quiet confidence, the gentle way he spoke to his animals, the respect he showed her in all their dealings, it all combined to create feelings she wasn't sure she should be having. Their relationship remained properly professional, but there were moments, when their hands brushed as they reached for the same dish, when she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression, when he lingered over coffee in the evenings, that suggested their arrangement might be evolving into something more. The turning point came on a hot August afternoon when Clara was hanging laundry behind the cabin. She heard the sound of approaching horses and looked up to see 3 riders coming up the valley at a fast pace. Something about their approach made her uneasy. Jack emerged from the barn, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Clara had rarely seen him wear it around the ranch, and its presence now sent a chill down her spine. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, dust swirling around their horses' hooves. Clara recognized the leader immediately, Samuel Garrett, the man who had rejected her so callously months before. He was flanked by 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. "Sullivan," Garrett said, not dismounting. "I hear you've got my property working for you." "I've got Miss Whitmore working for me, if that's what you mean," Jack replied evenly. "But she's not your property." Garrett's face darkened. "I paid good money to bring that woman out here. She belongs to me." "You rejected her," Jack pointed out. "Publicly. That makes her free to work where she pleases." "I've reconsidered," Garrett said. "Maybe I was too hasty. She can come back and we'll work something out." Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I'm not interested, Mr. Garrett. I have work here." Garrett's eyes fixed on her with a calculating look. "You're being paid, are you? How much?" Jack stepped slightly in front of Clara. "That's between Miss Whitmore and me." "I can offer more," Garrett continued, addressing Clara directly. "And marriage besides. You'd be the wife of a prosperous rancher instead of a hired girl." "I said I'm not interested," Clara repeated firmly. Garrett's expression hardened. "Maybe you don't understand your position, girl. You're a woman alone with no family, no connections. Sullivan here might get tired of you just like I did. Then where will you be?" "She's not alone," Jack said quietly. "And I don't get tired of people I respect." The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment, and Clara could feel the tension crackling between them. Finally, Garrett smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We'll see about that," he said. "Come on, boys. Let's go." They wheeled their horses around and rode away, leaving Clara and Jack standing in the dusty yard. Clara realized she was shaking. "Are you all right?" Jack asked, his hand gentle on her arm. Yes. She took a deep breath. "Do you think he'll cause trouble?" Jack's jaw was tight. "He might try. But he's got no legal claim on you, Clara. You're free to make your own choices." That evening, Jack cleaned his rifle and checked his ammunition supply. Clara watched him with growing unease. "You really think he'll come back?" "Men like Garrett don't like being told no," Jack said. "Especially not in front of other people." Clara sat down across from him at the table. "Maybe I should leave. I don't want to bring trouble to your ranch." Jack looked up sharply. "Is that what you want? To leave?" "No," she admitted. "I like it here. I like the work, and I like—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "I like having you here," Jack said quietly. "More than I probably should." Their eyes met across the table, and Clara felt her heart skip. "Jack, I know we said this was just a business arrangement," he continued. "But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. At least for me." Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "For me too." Jack turned his hand palm up and intertwined their fingers. I was afraid to say anything. After what you went through with Garrett, I didn't want you to feel pressured. You've never pressured me, Clara said. You've been nothing but kind and respectful. Clara, Jack began, then stopped as they heard the sound of horses approaching again. This time there were more riders, 6 or 7 men, from the sound of it. Jack was on his feet immediately, rifle in hand. Stay inside, he told Clara. No, she said firmly. This is about me. I won't hide while you face them alone. Jack looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. The riders were already in the yard, surrounding the cabin. Garrett sat his horse in the center of the group, a satisfied smile on his face. Evening, Sullivan, he called. I've brought some friends to help me collect what's mine. I told you before she's not yours, Jack replied. He stood on the porch steps, rifle held ready but not quite pointed at the riders. See, that's where you're wrong, Garrett said. I talked to Judge Harrison in town. He agrees that I have a legitimate claim. The woman came out here on my money to be my bride. Just because I decided to wait a bit doesn't mean I gave up my rights. Clara stepped out beside Jack. Judge Harrison wasn't there when you rejected me publicly, Mr. Garrett. Half the town heard you say I wouldn't do. Like I said, I reconsidered. A man's entitled to change his mind. And a woman's entitled to refuse, Jack said. Garrett's smile faded. You're outnumbered, Sullivan. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Jack glanced at the men surrounding them. Cowboys and drifters by the look of them, the kind who worked for wages and didn't ask too many questions. They were armed, but they didn't look particularly eager for trouble. Boys, Jack called to them, you know what you're doing here? You're helping a man kidnap a woman who doesn't want to go with him. That make you feel proud? A few of the riders shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. One of them, a young cowboy with red hair, spoke up. Mr. Garrett, you said she was your wife who ran off. She's as good as my wife, Garrett snapped. Now do what you're paid for. The redhead looked uncertain. I don't know, boss. If the lady doesn't want to come. She's coming, Garrett said flatly. One way or another. Clara stepped forward. Mr. Garrett, I'll make you a deal. If you can show me a legal marriage certificate, or a contract that gives you any claim over me, I'll consider what you're saying. Otherwise, please leave us in peace. Garrett's face flushed with anger. I don't need to show you anything, you ungrateful. That's enough, Jack interrupted, raising his rifle slightly. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Clara could see hands moving toward gun butts, and she realized the situation was about to explode into violence. Wait, she said loudly. There's another way to settle this. Both men looked at her in surprise. Mr. Garrett, you say I belong to you. Mr. Sullivan says I'm free to choose. Why don't we let the law decide? The law. Garrett sneered. What law? Frontier justice, Clara said, her mind racing. A challenge. If you're so sure of your claim, prove it. Jack frowned. Clara, what are you doing? She ignored him, focusing on Garrett. One contest. If you win, I'll come with you willingly. If Mr. Sullivan wins, you leave us alone permanently. Garrett's eyes gleamed with interest. What kind of contest? Clara's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. Your choice. Jack stepped closer to her. Clara, no. I won't let you gamble with your future. It's my choice to make, she replied quietly. Garrett was already grinning. A shooting contest. Best shot wins the lady. The red-headed cowboy spoke up again. Boss, that don't seem quite. You got something to say, Murphy? Garrett's voice was dangerous. Murphy shook his head and fell silent, but Clara could see the disapproval in his eyes. Fine, Jack said grimly. Shooting contest it is. Clara's stomach dropped. She'd been hoping Garrett might choose something less violent, but she'd given him the option and now she had to live with it. What are the terms? Jack asked. 5 shots each, Garrett said. At that fence post there, the one with the white blaze about 50 yards out. Closest to center wins. Jack nodded. Who goes first? You can, Garrett said magnanimously. Won't matter anyway. Clara watched in tense silence as Jack checked his rifle and took his position. She'd never seen him shoot before, and she had no idea how skilled he was. For all she knew, she'd just gambled her freedom on a man who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Jack's first shot split the air, and Clara saw a chunk of wood fly from the fence post. His second and third shots followed quickly, each one striking the post with solid thunks. The fourth and fifth shots came with methodical precision. When the dust settled, all 5 of Jack's shots were clustered in a tight group near the center of the white blaze on the post. Garrett's confidence seemed to waver slightly, but he took his position without comment. His first shot struck the post, but Clara could see even from a distance that it was wide of center. His second shot was better, and his third better still. But his fourth shot went wild, striking the post several inches from the others, and his fifth, taken hastily, was even worse. Murphy rode out to examine the target and called back the results. Sullivan's got 5 shots in about a 3-inch group, all near center. Garrett's got 4 decent shots and 1 flyer, spread over about 8 inches. Garrett's face was dark with anger. Best 2 out of 3. We agreed on 1 contest, Clara said firmly. You lost. The hell I did. Nobody beats me shooting. Jack stepped forward, still holding his rifle. It's over, Garrett. Keep your word. For a moment, Clara thought Garrett might draw his gun anyway. His hand hovered near his holster, and the other riders tensed. Then Murphy spoke up. Boss, you lost fair and square. We all saw it. Other cowboys nodded agreement. Whatever loyalty they had to Garrett, it apparently didn't extend to backing a man who couldn't keep his word. Garrett looked around at his men, then back at Jack and Clara. This isn't finished, he said finally. Yes, it is, Clara replied. It's finished. Garrett yanked his horse's head around and spurred away from the ranch. His men followed, though several of them touched their hats respectfully to Clara as they rode past. Murphy was the last to leave. He paused near the porch and looked down at Clara and Jack. Ma'am, for what it's worth, I think you made the right choice, he said quietly. Then he too rode away, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. Clara sank down onto the porch steps, suddenly weak with relief. I can't believe we got through that without anyone being shot. Jack sat down beside her, setting his rifle aside. That was a hell of a risk you took. I know. But I couldn't let him just take me, and I couldn't let you get hurt trying to stop him. What if I'd missed? Jack asked. What if he'd been the better shot? Clara looked at him seriously. Were you worried about that? Jack smiled. Not really. I spent 4 years in the army, Clara. I can shoot. She laughed, the tension finally breaking. You might have mentioned that before I made the challenge. You didn't ask. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the western sky. Finally, Clara spoke. Jack, earlier you said this had become more than a business arrangement for you. I did. What did you mean, exactly? Jack turned to look at her, his expression serious. I meant that I've fallen in love with you, Clara. Somewhere between that first day when I saw you in the pillory and tonight when you risked everything rather than be taken by a man you didn't want, I fell completely in love with you. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too. I didn't expect it, and I wasn't looking for it, but I do. Jack reached for her hand. Clara Whitmore, I know this isn't the most romantic setting, and I know we haven't known each other very long, but would you consider marrying me? For real this time, not some business arrangement, but because we love each other. Clara didn't hesitate. Yes. Jack leaned over and kissed her then, gentle and sweet under the rising stars. When they broke apart, Clara was smiling. You know what's funny? She said. What? I came out here to be a mail-order bride, and I ended up finding something much better. What's that? Love, Clara said simply. Real love, freely given. Jack squeezed her hand. The best things are worth waiting for. And sometimes, Clara added, they're worth $4 and a shooting contest. Jack laughed. Best $4 I ever spent. As they sat together on the porch of their home, for Clara knew now that's what it was, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The rejection, the humiliation, the desperate theft that had landed her in the pillory. At the time, each of those things had felt like the end of the world. But they had led her to Jack, to this ranch, to a love deeper and truer than anything Samuel Garrett could have offered. Sometimes, she reflected, the worst moments in life were really just detours leading to the best ones. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Copper Creek. Maria Santos stood as Clara's matron of honor, and Doc Morrison served as Jack's best man. Even Murphy, the red-headed cowboy, attended, having quit Garrett's employment and hired on with a more reputable rancher. Clara wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers from the ranch in her golden hair. Jack wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. When Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation, mostly ranch families who had come to know and respect the couple, erupted in cheers. At the reception afterward, held in the church hall, Sheriff Bradley raised a toast. "To Jack and Clara Sullivan," he said, raising his glass of apple cider. "May your love be as enduring as this frontier, and may your happiness grow like the cattle on your range." The crowd laughed and drank, and Clara felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the cider. These people, who had once viewed her with suspicion and judgment, now welcomed her as one of their own. As the evening wound down and the guests began to drift away, Maria Santos pulled Clara aside. "Mija," she said softly, "I am so happy for you. That first day when Senor Jack brought you to my cafe, I could see he was a good man. But more than that, I could see he saw the good in you too. Thank you, Maria, for everything." The older woman smiled and pressed a small wrapped package into Clara's hands. "A little something for your new home. Use it well." Later, back at the ranch, Clara unwrapped Maria's gift to find a beautiful hand-embroidered tablecloth, delicate flowers worked in bright thread around the edges. "It's lovely," Clara breathed, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. "Maria's grandmother made that," Jack said, recognizing the work. "She brought it from Mexico when the family came north. Maria's been saving it for someone special." Clara felt tears threaten again. "I don't deserve such kindness." Jack took her in his arms. "You deserve every good thing life has to offer, Mrs. Sullivan." Mrs. Sullivan. Clara smiled at the sound of it. She was no longer the rejected mail-order bride, no longer the thief in the pillory, no longer the woman with nowhere to go. She was Clara Sullivan, wife of Jack Sullivan, co-owner of a growing ranch, and part of a community that valued her for who she truly was. The months that followed brought new challenges and joys. Clara discovered she had a talent for managing the ranch's business affairs, and under her careful attention, their modest operation began to prosper. Jack expanded the herd and began the horse breeding program he dreamed of, while Clara established connections with buyers in larger towns. Their first winter together tested them both. The snows came early and stayed late, isolating them from town for weeks at a time. But rather than feeling trapped, Clara found herself cherishing these quiet months. She and Jack spent long evenings by the fire, reading, planning improvements to the ranch, and simply enjoying each other's company. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked one snowy evening as they sat together on the sofa he'd built. "Leaving everything you knew to come west?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I regret some of the pain along the way," she said finally. "But not the destination. This life, this place, you. None of it would have happened if I'd stayed safe in Ohio. Even the pillory?" Jack teased gently. Clara laughed. "Even the pillory. If I hadn't been desperate enough to steal that bread, if you hadn't seen me there that morning, we might never have met." "Oh, I think we would have found each other somehow," Jack said, pulling her closer. "Some things are just meant to be." Spring brought news that Samuel Garrett had sold his ranch and moved back east. Clara felt a sense of closure at the information, and perhaps a touch of pity. Garrett had been so concerned with finding what he thought he wanted that he'd missed what he actually needed. His loss, Jack said simply when Clara shared her thoughts. Our gain. As their first anniversary approached, Clara had news of her own to share. She chose a quiet evening after supper, when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Jack," she began, then paused, suddenly nervous. He looked at her with concern. "What is it? You look like you're about to tell me something momentous." Clara smiled. "I suppose I am. We're going to have a baby." Jack's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, joy, wonder, and finally pure happiness. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing. "A baby," he repeated, setting her down gently. "When?" "Late winter, I think. February, maybe March." Jack placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "A little Sullivan to carry on the ranch. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Jack said, kissing her thoroughly. "Clara, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a partner, a family. You've made my life complete." As they stood together in the fading light, Clara reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From the dusty streets of Copper Creek, where she'd stood humiliated and alone, to this porch where she was loved and cherished, the path had been neither straight nor easy. But every step had been worth it. The baby arrived on a cold February morning, with Maria Santos serving as midwife and Jack pacing the main room like a caged wolf. When Maria finally emerged with news that both mother and child were healthy, Jack's whoop of joy could probably be heard at the neighboring ranch. "A daughter," Maria announced with a smile. "Beautiful and strong, like her mama." Jack held his daughter for the first time with hands that trembled slightly, his weathered face soft with wonder. The baby looked up at him with dark eyes that would eventually turn the same brown as his own, and Clara felt her heart overflow with love for both of them. "What shall we call her?" Jack asked softly. Clara had been thinking about this for months. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Sullivan," Jack repeated, smiling. "It's perfect." As Clara watched her husband cradle their daughter, she thought about the miraculous turns life could take. A year and a half ago, she had been at her lowest point, hungry, desperate, and utterly alone. Now she was surrounded by love, part of a family that had grown from the ashes of her darkest moment. The pillory that had once held her captive had led to her freedom. The rejection that had broken her heart had opened it to true love. The theft that had marked her as a criminal had introduced her to the man who saw her true worth. Sometimes, Clara mused as she drifted off to sleep that night, the very thing that seems to destroy us is actually preparing us for something better than we ever imagined possible. In her case, $4 and a kind heart had bought her not just freedom from the pillory, but freedom to become the woman she was always meant to be. And in the years that followed, as Hope grew from a baby into a spirited little girl with her father's eyes and her mother's determination, as the ranch prospered and became a cornerstone of the growing community, as Clara and Jack's love deepened and matured, she never forgot the lesson of that terrible, wonderful day when her life changed forever. The price of freedom, she had learned, was sometimes paid in the most unexpected currency. But once paid, it bought riches beyond measure. Love, family, home, and the knowledge that even the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures. In the end, Clara Sullivan had indeed become a mail-order bride, just not in the way anyone could have predicted. She had ordered herself a new life through sheer courage and determination, and Jack Sullivan had been the man willing to pay the price to help her claim it. $4 well spent, they would often say in years to come, sharing a private smile that spoke of journeys survived and love discovered in the most unlikely of places. The wild frontier had tested them both, but it had also given them everything that mattered: each other, their daughter, their home, and a love story that would be told around Copper Creek for generations to come. The story of the mail-order bride who found her true match not through an advertisement in a newspaper, but through the kindness of a stranger who saw past her circumstances to the woman she truly was. And if sometimes Clara looked toward town and remembered that morning in the pillory, it was not with shame but with gratitude. For that moment of public humiliation had been the first step on a journey that led her home, to the ranch, to Jack, to the life she had always been meant to live. In the end, the best love stories weren't the ones that started with fairy tale beginnings, but the ones that transformed the darkest chapters into the brightest endings. And Clara Sullivan's story was proof that sometimes, When all seems lost, redemption comes riding in on horseback, wearing worn leather chaps and carrying exactly $4 silver and a heart big enough to see the true worth of a woman the world had rejected. The Wild West had been tamed, one act of kindness at a time.